Okay, in the next section, we're going to talk about trig functions, but we're going to use a unit circle. All right, the definition of a unit circle is a circle with a radius of 1 and a center that is at the origin, which is point zero zero. All right, so here's a picture of a unit circle, and it shows that you have a radius of 1 because all of the points on the axis are 1 unit from the origin. If the terminal side of the angle in standard position intersects the unit circle at a point P, which is going to have the coordinates x, y, then cosine of theta is equal to x and sine of theta is equal to y. So now when we're talking about the sine and cosine of theta, we're going to talk about their domain. Remember that your domain are your x values. The domain of sine and cosine is negative infinity to positive infinity. The range of sine and cosine, it falls between -1 and +1. So that's your background information on unit circle, what it looks like, and how we define sine and cosine using a unit circle. So if you have a ordered pair, then we know that cosine is going to be the x coordinate and sine is going to be the y coordinate. Okay, let me see if I can get this clear. All right, so now we're going to look at the trig definitions on the unit circle. So we're going to define the 6 trig functions using the unit circle. All right, we're going to first start with sine and cosine. We've already talked about those in the definitions on the previous page. Sine of theta is y, cosine of theta is x, and tan of theta is y over x. But because your x is in your denominator, x cannot be equal to 0. Your cosecant, we already know, is the inverse of sine. So if sine is 1, cosecant is 1 over y. I said sine was 1. Sine of theta is y. Cosecant is 1 over y, and y cannot be equal to 0. The cosine of theta is x, so the secant of theta is 1 over x, and x cannot be equal to 0. Tan is y over x, so if we take the inverse of y over x, we get the fact that cotan is x over y, and y cannot be equal to 0 because once again it's in your denominator. So now let's look at our quadrants. And we've already talked about this earlier, but there are 4 quadrants, and I've numbered the quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in each quadrant, we're going to talk about the signs of your x and your y. In quadrant 1, your ordered pair x, y, your x is positive and your y is positive. When we define our trig functions for any angle that is in quadrant 1, all trig functions are positive. So sine, cosine, tan, cosecant, secant, and cotangent will all be positive. When we move over to quadrant 2, the ordered pair x, y, you have a negative x and a positive y. All right, so any trig function that involves the variable x is going to be negative. So in quadrant 2, sine and cosecant are the only 2 trig functions that are positive. Quadrant 3, we have the ordered pair x, y. In quadrant 3, the x is negative and the y is negative. So tan and cotan are the only 2 positive trig functions for quadrant 3. Quadrant 4, you have the ordered pair x and y. X is positive, y is negative. Your cosine and your secant are the only 2 positive functions. And remember, we talked before, this line here, that could be your 0 degrees. Here is your 90 degree. This is 180 degrees. This is 270 degrees. And back here would also be 360. So the 90, 180, 270, and 360, these are called quadrantals. And we're going to talk about the signs of the X and Y in your quadrantals. Okay. All right, so you're going to need to make some flashcards because these are some ordered pairs that we're going to have to learn. Okay. 0 degrees has the coordinate 1, 0. 30 degrees is the square root of 3 over 2 and 1/2. 45 degrees is square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2. 60 degrees is 1/2 and square root of 3 over 2. Okay. 90 degrees is 0 and 1. 180 degrees is -1 and 0. 270 degrees is 0 and -1. And 360, you're back where you started, so we use the 0 degrees, which is 1, 0. So you need to learn this, and we need to remember the rules that we had for our reference angles. Okay, now the notation for reference angle is theta prime. All right, so in quadrant 1, you know there is no rule. Okay, the reference angle is equal to the given angle that falls in quadrant 1. All right, in quadrant 2, your reference angle is equal to 180 minus theta. In quadrant 3, your reference angle is equal to the given angle minus 180 degrees. And in quadrant 4, your reference angle is equal to 360 minus the given angle. So we're going to use these reference angles once we've decided what quadrant the angle falls in. We're going to find the reference angle. Once we find the reference angle, then we're going to use these angles here to determine the correct order pair. But we've got to remember the signs for quadrants 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember that in quadrant 1, all of your trig functions are positive. In quadrant 2, only sine and cosecant are positive. In quadrant 3, tan and cotan are positive. And in quadrant 4, cosine and secant are positive. So let's look at two practice problems with using the unit circle. In the first example, we have the sine of negative 90 degrees. Well, one rule that we've already learned is that we have to make our angles positive. So we're going to take this negative 90 and we're going to add 360 degrees to it. And when you add 360 degrees, you get 270 degrees. So now 270 is the reference angle, and we're going to find the sine of 270 degrees. Okay, that's one that we have to remember. And remember that the ordered pair for 270 degrees, your ordered pair is 0, -1. And then you go back to your trig definitions on the unit circle. Your sine of theta is always going to be equal to y. So the sine of 270 degrees is equal to -1. All right, for your second example, we're going to look at the cotan of 270 degrees. Okay, well, your angle is positive and it already falls between 0 and 360. 270 is a quadrantal, so you don't find a reference angle for a quadrantal. Go back to your trig definitions, and cotan of theta is equal to x over y. Your 270 is 0 and -1. This is your x, and this is your y. So cotan of 270 degrees is equal to 0 over -1, which is equal to 0. So now I'm going to give you a worksheet with some practice problems, and we're just going to work on finding a reference angle, stating the quadrant, and being able to define at least one trig ratio. You need to make sure that you have written these notes down. Make note of the things that you need to remember, the definition of your trig ratios, the rules for the quadrants, and you have to learn the ordered pairs for 0, 30, 45, 60, 90, 180, and 270 degrees.